After a short moment of silence, the violet mink glanced at Yang Yi before it nodded. Right when the Beast Emperor was delighted, strands of fluctuations were once more emanated from the violet mink's mouth. After a short while, the Beast Emperor took a deep glance at Yang Yi before he said, "Kid, you're really very lucky to have obtained its acknowledgement." Once he finished saying this, he gazed once more at the violet mink and said, "I agree to your requirements." The violet mink nodded, and then it gazed at Yang Yi and revealed a faint smile. Even though he didn't know what the little fellow and the Beast Emperor were talking about, he was clearly aware that the Beast Emperor's request had troubled the little fellow. Moreover, the little fellow had probably agreed in the end because of him. When he thought up to here, Xianxia's heart felt warm, and he said, "I too feel that I'm very fortunate to be able to encounter the little fellow." The violet mink immediately revealed a brilliant smile on its round and plump face upon hearing what Yang Yi said, and then it flashed onto Yang Ye's shoulder before it rubbed its forehead against Yang Ye's face. A wisp of shock flashed through the Beast Emperor's eyes when he witnessed this scene. In the beginning, he felt that the violet mink might have had no choice but to stay by Yang Ye's side, or it was because of certain reasons related to its interests. However, this man and mink were probably not just companions now. When he associated this with the conditions that he'd discussed with the violet mink just now, the Beast Emperor knew that he had to completely change the way he treated Yang Yi. When he thought up to here, the Beast Emperor hesitated slightly before he flicked his finger towards Yang Yi, and then a strand of gold light directly entered Yang Ye's body. Yang Ye's entire body shook while he felt as if something had been added to his body, yet he was unable to sense it. He immediately suppressed the shock and bewilderment in his heart before he gazed at the Beast Emperor and spoke in a puzzled tone. "Senior, what's this?" "It's an armor." The Beast Emperor smiled as he said, "It's called the Violet Gold Armor. It was once a low-grade heaven rank armor, but it can only be considered to be at the high grade of the earth rank right now." "A heaven rank armor." Yang Yi instantly gasped. "My God! A heaven rank armor. The heaven rank." Yang Yi was slightly unable to maintain his calm. Presently, his physical body wasn't inferior to an ordinary spirit rank dark beast. And now that he possessed this armor, he wondered how abnormal his physical defense was right now. "Don't get excited," the Beast Emperor said. "Didn't I just tell you? It can only be considered to be a high-grade earth rank armor now, and it's much weaker when compared to its prime." Yang Ye's mind cleared up slightly when he heard this. Even though the low-grade heaven rank and the high-grade earth rank were only a level away, Yang Yi understood what that little bit represented. It was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. After pondering deeply for a moment, Yang Yi said, "Senior, according to my knowledge, it shouldn't be easy for a heaven-rank treasure's quality to be downgraded, right?" The Beast Emperor smiled and said, "That's true. Even an Exalt Realm expert would find destroying a heaven-rank treasure to be extremely difficult. But if it's me..." "Haha!" Yang Yi couldn't help but laugh bitterly when he heard the Beast Emperor. Indeed, it was undoubtedly a wishful dream if an ordinary person wanted to destroy a heaven-rank treasure. However, was this middle-aged man who stood before him an ordinary person? "Even though this armor is useless to me, it's extremely useful for you at your current realm of cultivation," said the Beast Emperor. Yang Yi shook his head and laughed bitterly. Even though a high-grade earth-rank treasure was very good, how could it compare to a heaven-rank treasure? But Yang Yi was able to accept this fact because having something was better than having nothing. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi cupped his fists towards the Beast Emperor and said, "Thank you, Senior, for the gift, but I'm slightly curious. How was this heaven-rank treasure downgraded to the earth rank?" "Because the owner of this armor forcefully withstood a punch of mine," the Beast Emperor said. "That human survived because of this armor. However, the equipment spirit within this armor perished. Once it lost its equipment spirit, this armor could only be considered to be ordinary, and if it wasn't out of consideration for how that equipment spirit had loyally protected its master, I would have tossed this armor away a long time ago." "What was the cultivation of that fellow who suffered a punch from Senior?" asked Yang Yi in a low voice. The Beast Emperor glanced at Yang Yi and said, "The Exalt Realm. However, he wasn't an ordinary Exalt Realm expert. Of course, if it wasn't for the loyal protection of this armor's equipment spirit, then he would have been unable to resist a punch of mine no matter how much of a monstrous genius he was. Xianxia's eyelids twitched when he heard this. An Exalt Realm expert had actually relied on a heaven rank treasure to survive a single punch from this beast emperor. Doesn't that mean that if an Exalt Realm expert doesn't possess a heaven rank treasure, it would be impossible for that Exalt Realm expert to even withstand a single punch from the beast emperor? Xianxia was shocked. Exactly how strong is the beast emperor? This armor could originally take human form to assist its owner in battle, and it would automatically protect its owner when its owner was in danger. However, now that it has lost its equipment spirit, it merely possesses the ability of a defensive dark treasure. Moreover, it won't automatically defend its owner anymore. In other words, you have to activate it with your profound energy in the future. You can give it a try right now, said the Beast Emperor. Xianxia nodded when he heard this, and then the profound energy within his body surged. In an instant, a thin violet gold-colored armor formed from energy had appeared on him, and besides his head, it covered his entire body and even his arms. Xianxia couldn't help but feel excited when he gazed at the violet gold-colored energy armor that covered his entire body. Even though he hadn't witnessed its defensive abilities with his own two eyes, he was able to sense how terrifying it was. In other words, when the strength of his physical body was combined with the defensive ability of the violet gold armor, an ordinary King Realm expert would be unable to harm him at all. The Beast Emperor suddenly asked, "Right, do you still have that command token I gave you?" Xianxia was stunned when he heard this. If the Beast Emperor hadn't mentioned, Xianxia would have almost forgotten the command token. He immediately flipped his palm and withdrew it. As he gazed at the command token in Xianxia's palm, the Beast Emperor smiled and said, "Kid, I have to say that you're stupid. Do you know what this command token represents?" "What does it represent?" Xianxia really didn't know. "It represents my presence." The Beast Emperor smiled and said, "With this command token in your possession, you can move freely through the entire Grand Myriad Mountains except for some forbidden areas of my Dark Beast Empire. Moreover, you can command dark beasts below the spirit rank. If you'd withdrawn this command token when you were surrounded that day, then you would have been able to avoid all the trouble that you encountered at that time." Command dark beasts below the spirit rank? Xianxia was shocked. He hadn't imagined that this command token actually possessed such a function. Even though it was merely dark beasts below the spirit rank, it was still extremely terrifying to be able to command the dark beasts in the Grand Myriad Mountains. After all, the dark beasts on the Grand Myriad Mountains were in the billions. After a short while, Xianxia suppressed the shock in his heart and said, "Senior, why? Why?" The Beast Emperor chuckled and glanced at the violet mink before he said, "It's naturally because of it. You ought to be clearly aware that besides dark beasts at the spirit rank or above, there are practically no dark beasts capable of resisting the terrifying bloodline pressure possessed by the little fellow. Since it's like that, then why wouldn't I just give both of you the convenience?" Xianxia laughed dryly when he heard this. Obviously, the Beast Emperor knew about the little fellow terrifying groups of dark beasts. Indeed, there really were practically no dark beasts below the spirit rank who could resist his terrifying bloodline pressure. Moreover, the little fellow's strength had improved once more, so it was probably not just king rank dark beasts that couldn't resist the little fellow's bloodline pressure. Even some spirit rank dark beasts would probably be unable to resist its bloodline pressure as well. "You're heading to the ancient battlefield to seize karmic luck?" The Beast Emperor had spoken in a low voice. Xianxia was stunned. He didn't know why the Beast Emperor had asked this question, but he immediately nodded and said, "I promised the founding ancestor that I would represent the Grand Qin Empire to seize karmic luck." The Beast Emperor shook his head and said, "If it's possible, then don't go fight for the karmic luck and just stay in my Dark Beast Empire. In this way, you'll be able to keep your life." "Why do you say that, Senior?" Xianxia frowned as he spoke these words. The Beast Emperor raised his head and gazed towards the south, and then he sighed lightly and said, "You should probably be aware that the relationship between the 6 great powers and the Grand Qin Empire isn't harmonious. presently, the Grand Qin Empire is like the blazing sun in the midday sky, and its forces have already aroused fear in the Origin School and the other 5 great powers. Moreover, the founding emperor possesses lofty aspirations and intends to annihilate those extraordinary sects. In other words, a battle will erupt sooner or later between the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers. At this moment, you're representing the Grand Qin Empire to fight for karmic. It would be fine if your accomplishments were bad or you were killed in the ancient battle. However, if you succeeded, then do you think the 6 great powers would let you live? Yang Yi fell silent when he heard this. He hadn't thought about all of this in the past. When the Beast Emperor spoke of it now, he suddenly realized that he'd been swept into a vortex between these great powers without him even realizing it. Moreover, being swept into such a vortex with the strength he possessed now would definitely cause him to be crushed into pieces. However, Yang Yi laughed bitterly, shook his head and said, "Senior, I appreciate your good intentions. However, I've made an agreement with the founding ancestor, and I would represent the empire to seize karmic luck in exchange for the founding ancestor protecting my mother's life. For the sake of my mother, have no other choice." The Beast Emperor glanced at Yang Yi before he nodded slightly, and then he said, "Never mind. Since you're heading to the ancient battlefield, then I'll give you some fortune. I hope you'll be able to provide my dark beast race with some help after you arrive there." As soon as he finished speaking, the Beast Emperor suddenly stretched out his hand and touched the center of Yang Ye's forehead with his finger, and then a strand of terrifying energy surged from his finger into Yang Yi. As a strand of pure energy surged incessantly into his body, Yang Ye's eyes gradually opened wide because he noticed that the Beast Emperor was actually forcefully improving his cultivation right now. This discovery shocked Yang Yi because the forceful improvement of his cultivation was very likely to cause irreparable harm to him. Strictly speaking, it could even cause him to be unable to advance from the King Realm. What exactly does the Beast Emperor intend to do? Unfortunately, he was utterly unable to resist right now, and he could only allow the Beast Emperor to forcefully pour that pure energy into him. After an unknown period of time, the Beast Emperor suddenly withdrew his hands. At the same time, a terrifying imposing aura surged out from Yang Ye's body. The Beast Emperor grinned before he waved his hand lightly, and the terrifying imposing aura instantly vanished. A wisp of admiration and surprise flashed through the Beast Emperor's eyes as he gazed at Yang Yi, who still had his eyes closed tightly, because he noticed that he'd underestimated the natural talent and potential that Yang Yi possessed. According to his initial estimates, Yang Yi would be able to endure his energy for 15 minutes at most. However, Yang Yi had endured it for almost 4 hours. Even a spirit realm expert would find it difficult to endure his energy for 4 hours. However, Yang Yi, who was merely at the first heaven realm, had accomplished such feat. At the same time that the Beast Emperor felt shocked by this, he was slightly puzzled. He was puzzled about the reason why Yang Yi was able to endure so much energy. After quite some time passed, Yang Yi opened his eyes slowly, and then he instantly gasped after he checked his body, because he noticed that he was already at the King Realm. My God! I just advanced by 2 ranks, yet I've actually advanced by a realm now. Isn't such speed a little too terrifying? He didn't feel any pleasant surprise, and he only felt shocked, because excessive use of external forces to improve his cultivation would definitely cause irreparable damage to his body. When he thought up to here, Yang Yi gazed at the Beast Emperor and said, "Senior." The Beast Emperor waved his hand and interrupted Yang Yi. "Kid, I know what you want to say, and I know what you're worried about as well. There's no need to be worried. The reason I improved your cultivation by force was that your foundation is extremely solid. Moreover, the toughness of your physical body and meridians far exceed an ordinary King Realm expert. In other words, you've already satisfied all conditions to attain the King Realm, and the only reason you haven't advanced was that you lacked a critical factor." Yang Yi couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he heard this. "It's fine so long as it doesn't cause me to suffer from any undetectable injuries." When he thought up to here, he bowed solemnly to the Beast Emperor and said, "Thank you for your assistance, Senior. I'll never forget this kindness." He'd spoken these words sincerely, because if it wasn't for the Beast Emperor, then it would probably take some time for him to advance into the King Realm, and he was truly not confident in his ability to face those monstrous geniuses at the ancient battlefield while still at the First Heaven Realm. Now that he'd advanced into the King Realm, then would he, Yang Yi, have to fear anyone in the same realm of cultivation? The Beast Emperor grinned and said, "There's no need to thank me. I'll need your help in the future. I only hope that you wouldn't refuse when the time comes. May I know what Senior needs my help with?" Yang Yi was puzzled. The Beast Emperor possessed extraordinary strength yet actually said that he needed Yang Yi's help, and this caused Yang Yi to be very bewildered. "You'll know when the time comes." The Beast Emperor smiled, and then he said with a serious expression, "I know you have a proud character and would rather die than submit. However, you absolutely must not cause trouble within Ancient Domain City after you arrive at the ancient battlefield, especially the enforcement team. Please be sure to commit this to memory." Yang Ye's expression couldn't help but turn solemn when he heard this. It's even able to make an existence like the Beast Emperor seem fearful. Exactly what sort of existence is that enforcement team? Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment before he asked, "Senior, what sort of team is that? Besides that, what's the Ancient Domain City? You don't even know about Ancient Domain City, yet you dare to head to the ancient battlefield by yourself." The Beast Emperor smiled and said, "Ancient Domain City is the one and only city on the ancient battlefield. Once you leave the territory of the Dark Beast Empire, the Ancient Domain City is the only city for an area of a few 100,000 kilometers around the ancient battlefield. Ancient Domain City is a place one must pass in order to arrive at the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. So, all those monstrous geniuses that have come to seize karmic luck would choose to reside there for some time while waiting for the Hidden Dragon Pagoda to open. In other words, all the monstrous geniuses of the entire continent would make an appearance there during this period of time." All the monstrous geniuses of the entire continent? Yang Yi frowned and said, "Then wouldn't Ancient Domain City be extremely chaotic?" "Chaotic?" The Beast Emperor shook his head and said, "No, it won't, because there's order in the city, and the ones who maintain the order there are 3 ninth-rank sects of the Central Territory, an extraordinary demon beast clan of the Demon Territory, and a few extraordinary powers from the Nether Territory and Devil Territory. No one dares to act rashly there when it's managed by these extraordinary powers." "Ninth-rank sects?" Yang Yi frowned and said, "Senior, sects are divided by ranks as well?" "Of course," the Beast Emperor said. "Besides the Southern Territory, the sects of the other territories are divided by ranks. Perhaps you're not aware of what being a ninth-rank sect represents. Allow me to explain. If the strongest sect in the Southern Territory, the Origin School, was placed in the Central Territory, then it would be a third-rank sect, and it might even be unable to be considered a third-rank sect." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this. He hadn't seen those ninth-rank sects, but he'd seen the Origin School. The strength that the Origin School revealed occasionally had already shocked him to the extreme. Not to mention that the Origin School had an extraordinary expert like Yuan Tian. However, even then, the Origin School could actually only be considered as a third-rank sect in the Central Territory. How terrifying are ninth-rank sects! The world is extremely large. The Beast Emperor gazed at Yang Yi and said, "It's much larger than you've imagined. If you have the chance in the future, then travel the world. You'll notice that we're truly too tiny in this world. Besides that, it should be possible for you to join a good sect with the strength and potential you possess." Yang Yi chuckled. If he didn't have to rescue his mother, then leaving the Southern Territory to visit the other territories wasn't a bad idea. However, his mother was still suffering at the hands of the Flower Palace, so how could he possibly leave and head to the other territories? Yang Yi shook his head and said, "Right, Senior. You told me not to offend the enforcement team just now. What sort of existence is the enforcement team that even Senior seems to be slightly afraid of them?" The enforcement team was jointly established by those extraordinary powers. The Beast Emperor had a slightly solemn expression as he said, "The objective of their establishment is to maintain the order in the ancient battlefield and the ancient domain city. Of course, their main objective is the fight for the karmic luck in the Hidden Dragon Pagoda. Which power wouldn't want to take full possession of the hidden dragon pagoda? However, everyone is clearly aware that not a single power in the continent is capable of seizing full possession of it. So, they had no choice but to join forces and take possession of it. As for the hidden dragon list, ha ha ha, it was merely something that was created to console those smaller powers. When he spoke up to hear, the Beast Emperor glanced at Yang Yi and said in a low voice, "Kid, remember that you absolutely must not offend the enforcement team. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survive no matter how many lives you possess. I'm not trying to scare you. Once you offend them, then you'll definitely die even if you flee to the Origin School's headquarters." "They are that formidable?" said Yang Yi in a surprised tone. "The weakest member amongst them is at the Exalt realm." "What do you think?" said the Beast Emperor in a flat tone. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched when he heard this. "The weakest is at the exact realm. That what about the strongest?" Indeed, even the Beast Emperor would probably be unable to save him if such a force pursued him. The Beast Emperor spoke slowly. "Right, even though there's order in the city, the order there is unlike the Grand Qin Empire. The so-called order there is one where others shouldn't harm the interests of those extraordinary powers. Moreover, everything there if governed by strength. In other words, so long as you don't harm the interests of those extraordinary sects, then you should fight when you have to, and you should even strike lethally. Only in that way would you be able to reduce the amount of trouble you face." Yang Yi nodded, and then he said, "I'm naturally aware of that." When he spoke up to hear, Yang Yi bowed once more to the Beast Emperor and said, "Senior, I'll never forget the kindness you've shown me this time. If Senior needs any help from me in the future, then I'll definitely not refuse so long as it's within the scope of my ability." Repaying enmity with enmity and kindness with kindness, this was the principle which Yang Yi acted upon. Even though the Beast Emperor had mostly helped him because of the little fellow, he couldn't erase the kindness that the Beast Emperor had shown him, and he had to repay it. The Beast Emperor smiled and said, "You're a loyal person that attaches great importance to his relationships. I believe you, and I believe the little fellow's judgment. As for the thing I need your help with, I'll tell you about it in the future. Your strength is still too low now, and you're unable to be of help to me." Yang Yi nodded and said, "Since it's like that, then Senior can come looking for me when you think I have the ability to accomplish it. If there's nothing else, then I'll be bidding my farewells." The Beast Emperor nodded and said, "I'll send you there." As soon as he finished speaking, the Beast Emperor waved his hand, and then Yang Yi instantly vanished on the spot. As he gazed at the spot where Yang Yi vanished from, the Beast Emperor fell silent, and then he chuckled after a long time and said, "Founding Emperor! Oh, Founding Emperor! Old geezer Zue as well. Both of your insides will definitely turn green from regret for giving up on this kid. How could he be an ordinary person when he is able to make a spatial mink which is an ancient variant beast follow him? Moreover, it's even a spatial mink with violet pupils that's rare to come by even in 10,000 years. The enlightened sword heart? Haha! The enlightened sword heart is nothing when compared to the mysteries hidden within him." As soon as he finished speaking, the Beast Emperor roared with laughter, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After an unknown period of time, Yang Yi regained his consciousness, and then he shook his head and slowly opened his eyes. He was instantly shocked when he saw the scene before him. An extremely grand and enormous city was standing before him. Why was it called an enormous city? Because the walls of the city were over 1 kilometer in height. As for their width, in any case, he wasn't able to see the end of it even with the sight he possessed as an expert at the King Realm. This ancient city could be said to be the grandest and most imposing city Yang Yi had ever laid eyes on, and even the imperial capital of the Grand Qin Empire couldn't compare to it. In next to no time, Yang Ye's gaze descended towards the center of the ancient city because 3 words were inscribed there: Ancient Domain City. Haha! Another newbie is here. Let's see which entrance he'll take from amongst the heaven, earth, man, and dog entrance. Will he take the man entrance or the dog entrance? Right when Yang Yi was shocked by the grandeur of the ancient domain city, a ridiculing voice had suddenly resounded from the side. Yang Yi withdrew his gaze and looked towards the source of the voice. He saw a group of young men standing ahead, and they had their arms crossed while they gazed at him with mocking gazes. As soon as he laid eyes on them, Yang Yi knew that they were from the other territories because it was impossible for someone from the southern territory to not recognize him. He wasn't being narcissistic, and it was instead because he'd practically become the public enemy of the younger generation in the entire southern territory. So, if they were from the southern territory, then how could they possibly not recognize him? Yang Yi withdrew his gaze because he recalled the Beast Emperor's words, and he decided not to pay any attention to them. After that, he started walking towards the entrance to the city. However, he'd merely taken a few steps before he stopped once more because there were 4 entrances in front of him. The entrance on the left was the largest. It was 150 m tall, around 100 m wide, and it was constructed extremely luxuriously. Because Yang Yi noticed to his shock that this entrance was actually created from Earth rank gold steel. It was materials at the Earth rank. And it was even gold steel. Gold steel was an existence that was much harder than iron. Such a treasure was extremely rare even in a sect like the Sword Sect. Yet now it had been made into the entrance of the city. Even the Talisman Masters Association isn't so extravagant. Yang Yi suppressed the short in his heart while his gaze shot towards the center of the top of the entrance. There were 2 large words inscribed there in violet gold, Heaven Entrance. In next to no time, Yang Yi had another shocking discovery, and it was the 2 people that were standing at the sides of the Heaven Entrance. They had extremely ordinary appearances, but they were spirit realm experts. Exactly what is this Heaven Entrance? It actually needs spirit realm experts to guard it? After a moment of silence, Yang Yi moved his gaze and looked towards the entrance beside the Heaven Entrance. This entrance was much smaller when compared to the Heaven Entrance, and it wasn't made from Earth rank gold steel anymore. It was made from a profound rank rock called fortified steel. Even though fortified steel was extremely precious as well, it was undoubtedly extremely inferior when compared to Earth rank gold steel. Just like the Heaven Entrance, there were 2 people guarding this entrance, and they were spirit realm experts as well. However, their auras were much weaker when compared to the 2 experts standing in front of the Heaven Entrance. There were 2 words inscribed at the top of this entrance as well, but it wasn't Heaven Entrance, and it was Earth Entrance instead. Yang Yi moved his gaze away towards the entrance beside the Earth Entrance. Yang Yi was slightly speechless when he saw this entrance because it was truly slightly shabby when compared to the 2 entrances from before. This entrance was around 1.5 m tall while its width wasn't even 1.5 m. In other words, it was just nice for a single person to pass through. Yang Yi couldn't help but shake his head and smile when he saw the words Man Entrance above the entrance. This entrance is really worthy of its name. Yang Yi shook his head and looked at the final entrance, and he was instantly stunned when he saw it. Because instead of calling this final entrance an entrance, it should be called a hole. Moreover, it was an extremely small hole. If someone wanted to enter through this hole, then one had to crawl through it. In other words, it wasn't an entrance at all. Yang Yi raised his head, and he couldn't help but frown when he saw the words inscribed at the top of it. Because the words there was, Dog Entrance. After staying silent on the spot for some time, Yang Yi shook his head. Isn't it just a few entrances? Is there any need to hesitate? Once he straightened out his thoughts, Yang Yi stopped hesitating and walked towards the Heaven Entrance. At this moment, more and more people had arrived in front of the entrance, and the few dozens of people from before had grown to a few hundreds of people. They instantly stopped moving when they saw Yang Yi walking towards the Heaven Entrance, and then all of them gazed at Yang Yi. Moreover, their gazes seemed as if they were looking at a freak. What the fuck? The Heaven Entrance. He actually chose the Heaven Entrance. Could it be that he's an extraordinary genius from the 3 9th rank sects of the Central Territory? But he looks very unfamiliar. Moreover, based on his dressing, he doesn't seem like someone from our Central Territory. But if he isn't from our Central Territory, then which territory would be able to foster such a formidable fellow that dares to take the Heaven Entrance? Could it be that formidable experts can only come from your Central Territory? Perhaps he's from our Northern Territory. Haha. If he's from our northern territory, then our northern territory will truly gain face this time. Haha. Humph. Perhaps he's from our western territory. The western territory? Why don't you say he's from the southern territory? Not to mention fostering someone that can take the heaven entrance. It's impossible for savage places like your western territory and the southern territory to foster someone that can even traverse the earth entrance. The southern territory? Tui. Don't compare my western territory with such trash. They didn't even have a single person that could pass through the earth entrance, and half of them crawled in through the dog entrance. They completely disgraced themselves. Stop talking about meaningless things. Let's see if this fellow can pass through the heaven entrance. TSK. If I'm not wrong, then not a single person has passed through the heaven entrance until now, right? Indeed, those extraordinary geniuses from the 3/9 rank sects of the Central Territory, the Demon Territory, the Nether Territory, and the Devil Territory haven't arrived yet. So, up until now, not a single person has passed through the heaven entrance. Not even one? Haha. Won't there be one now? Xianxia hadn't thought much about it when he came to the heaven entrance because he merely felt that since the heaven entrance was so huge, then why should he take the smaller entrances? But now, when he sensed the variety of strange gazes coming from the surroundings, Xianxia knew that there was definitely something different about the so-called heaven entrance. But it's fine. I can't just stop, right? When he thought up to here, Xianxia disregarded the gazes of the people in the surroundings and sped up. When the spirit realm experts standing at the sides of the heaven entrance saw Xianxia walking over, their eyelids instantly twitched while they exchanged glances. There was no contempt and disdain in their eyes, and there was only a solemn and curious expression there, because they were very clearly aware of what taking the heaven entrance meant, and it was absolutely impossible for one to attempt to use the heaven entrance unless that person was especially confident in his own strength. Ha! Right when Xianxia was only around 10 away from the heaven entrance, loud laughter suddenly resounded from behind the crowd. The crowd was just about to turn around and look over when a sharp whistle suddenly resounded. After that, a young man in white robed had appeared mysterious in front of Xianxia. The young man was around 20 years of age. His long hair hung loosely on his shoulders. His eyes were filled with spirit. A faint smile hung on the corners of his mouth, and his hands were placed behind his back. Even though he didn't display it on purpose, the crowd was still able to clearly sense the wild aura he had. The young man sized up Ancient Domain City before he chuckled and said, "This is Ancient Domain City? Not bad. Not bad." It didn't disappoint this young master. After a light exclaim of surprise, the young man glanced at the 4 entrances and said, "This is the entrances of dignity that the first city governor of Ancient Domain City created? The dog entrance? Haha. How interesting." Meanwhile, one of the spirit realm experts who stood at the sides of the entrances had taken a step forward and gazed at the young man as he shouted in a low voice, "State your identity." The young man smiled indifferently and said, "Shi Luo from the Central Territory's Endless Sect. People call me Young Master Shi Luo. I'm 20 years of age and at the peak of the King Realm. Right, it should be the half-step spirit realm. The Endless Sect's Young Master Shi Luo." Countless people in the surroundings had instantly gasped when they heard the young man's self-introduction, and their gazes towards the young man were filled with shock and excitement. A genius from the Central Territory couldn't help but cry out involuntarily in a frenzied voice. "He's one of the 3 outstanding geniuses from the Central Territory, Young Master Shi Luo. My God, it's actually him. Oh my God, I've actually met him in person." This genius couldn't be blamed for losing his composure because the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory might not have a great reputation in the other territories, but they were renowned throughout the Central Territory. They were from the 3/9 rank sects of the Central Territory. Moreover, they were the most outstanding disciples in the younger generation of their respective sects. Of course, if it was merely for this reason, then it wasn't a big deal. Most importantly, the 3 of them had once jointly killed an Exalt Realm expert. It wasn't an Exalt Realm expert that had been heavily injured or had advanced by utilizing the assistance of treasures. It was an Exalt Realm expert that had cultivated all the way on his own. How terrifying was such an expert? However, it was exactly such an expert that had been annihilated by the joint forces of these three youth. All three of them became renowned after that battle, and it was also that battle that created the three outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory. It could be said that the three of them represented the overall strength of the Central Territory's younger generation. On the other hand, amongst the 5 human territories, which were the Eastern, Western, Southern, Northern, and Central Territories, the Central Territory was considered the strongest. In other words, the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory could be said to represent the entire strength of the younger generation of the humans in profounder continent. Of course, the geniuses from the Demon Territory, Nether Territory, and Devil Territory were definitely not inferior to these 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory, but all 3 of these territories didn't belong to the humans. When he heard the young man's self-introduction, the eyelids of that spirit realm expert twitched. He'd heard of young Master Shi Luo's reputation because he was from the Central Territory as well. However, he was on duty to guard Ancient Domain City throughout the year, so he'd never met young Master Shi Luo in person. The expression of the spirit realm expert eased up, and then he nodded slightly and said in a light voice, "You ought to be aware of the heaven entrance's might. If this young man before him could be said to be representing the entire Central Territory, so this spirit realm expert naturally didn't want young Master Shi Luo to die in the heaven entrance. Because if that happened, then the Central Territory wouldn't just lose an extraordinary expert, it was very likely for the Central Territory to become the laughingstock of the other territories. However, the spirit realm expert had merely completed half of his warning when young Master Shi Luo had shaken his head and interrupted him. Young Master Shi Luo said, "Thank you for your kind intentions, Senior. However, you ought to be clearly aware that all the disciples of the Endless Sect who've arrived at Ancient Domain City over the years have all gone through the heaven entrance. Even though many have died within the entrance, the disciples of my Endless Sect have never feared it. To speak some immodest words, I'm currently representing the entire Endless Sect. If I were to be afraid and refuse to use the heaven entrance, then wouldn't I bring shame to the Endless Sect? You can die, but you can't bring shame to the Endless Sect. This is something the master of my Endless Sect once said. Moreover, I'm confident in my ability to pass through the heaven entrance. Awesome, as expected of one of the 3 outstanding geniuses from our Central Territory. Great. That spirit realm expert couldn't help but speak with excitement when he heard young Master Shi Luo. It wasn't just this spirit realm expert who'd become excited when he heard young Master Shi Luo. Even the young geniuses in the surroundings who were from the other territories couldn't help but reveal expressions of admiration towards young Master Shi Luo. Yang Yi couldn't help but glance at young Master Shi Luo when he heard this. Needless to say, even though this fellow called young Master Shi Luo seemed to be slightly wild, he didn't arouse feelings of detest in others. Conversely, young Master Shi Luo's frankness and confidence caused others to be unable to help but arouse a good impression and admiration towards him. Young Master Shi Luo smiled, and then he walked slowly towards the heaven entrance. He'd taken just 2 steps when he suddenly stopped, and then he turned around to gaze at Yang Yi. After sizing up Yang Yi, he said, "If I'm not wrong, then you seem to have intended to take the heaven entrance just now?" Yang Yi nodded and said, "Of course, this entrance is so huge, so why would I not take the large entrance and take the smaller entrances instead?" Oh! A wisp of interest flashed in his eyes, and then young Master Shi Luo carefully sized up Yang Yi once more before he commented. "The first rank of the King Realm. Your aura is steady and deep, but your cultivation is truly a bit too low. I think you probably don't know how terrifying the heaven entrance is, right?" "Indeed," Yang Yi spoke frankly. "It's my first time at Ancient Domain City." Young Master Shi Luo was stunned, and then he said with an astounded tone, "You dared to choose the heaven entrance when you weren't aware of how terrifying it is?" Yang Yi frowned when he heard this. He glanced at the heaven entrance before he said, "Isn't it just an entrance? Why wouldn't I dare to use it?" Young Master Shi Luo instantly gave Yang Yi a thumbs up when he heard this before he exclaimed, "You're formidable. By the way, which territory and sect are you from? Your sect is really a failure. It actually allowed a rash fellow like you to come to Ancient Domain City." Yang Yi was just about to speak when a sharp whistle suddenly resounded from behind him. Yang Yi frowned, and then he didn't hesitate to flash over 10 to the side. Young Master Shi Luo's expression had changed slightly as well, and then his figure flashed over 10 to the side as well. Bang! Right when they just flashed away, a strand of saber chi that was over 30 long had smashed down where they stood just moments before. Along with a thunderous explosion, an enormous rift that was over 30 long had appeared there. Fucking bastards. Both of you fled quite swiftly, huh? Meanwhile, a young man who carried a large saber on his shoulder and had a bared upper body walked over slowly towards Yang Yi and young Master Shi Luo. He glanced at them before he spat and cursed. Fucking bastards. Isn't it just a door? What are the two of you wasting time here for? Aren't the two of you aware that you're blocking this lord's path? Yang Yi glanced indifferently at the young man, and then he shrugged and took 2 steps back. In his heart, Yang Yi thought to himself, someone to test it has finally arrived. Even though he wasn't afraid of the entrance, he didn't want to be taken by surprise and taught a lesson. Now, he had someone to test it for him so he could see exactly what sort of secrets the entrance hid. Young Master Shi Luo smiled lightly as well, and then he retreated to Yang Ye's side and even gestured to the young man to go ahead. At least both of you know how to act, otherwise this lord would have chopped both of you to death. The young man grunted coldly before he walked towards the heaven entrance. Young Master Shi Luo shrugged, and then he glanced at Yang Yi and said, "Congratulations." Yang Yi frowned. "What do you mean?" Young Master Shi Luo smiled and said, "Because once you watch the consequences that this fellow suffers, you wouldn't take the heaven entrance anymore. If you don't take it, then you wouldn't die. So, don't you think I should congratulate you?" "Is that so?" Yang Yi grinned and didn't speak further. After that, he gazed at the young man who'd arrived in front of the heaven entrance. Yang Yi wanted to see exactly how terrifying the heaven entrance was. Young Master Shi Luo glanced at Yang Yi before he turned to look at the young man in front of the heaven entrance. "State your identity." The spirit realm expert that spoke earlier had obstructed the young man's path and shouted in a heavy voice. The young man twisted his wrist, and he stabbed his saber into the ground. In an instant, the ground trembled violently before numerous arm-thick rifts extended swiftly towards the surroundings. Countless people in the surroundings were shocked when they witnessed this scene because they'd sensed saber intent just now. Moreover, it wasn't first level but third level saber intent. Just based on his third level saber intent alone, there wasn't anyone in the surroundings who dared to look down upon the young man. Of course, Yang Yi and young Master Shi Luo were excluded from this. The young man glanced at the crowd in the surroundings. When he noticed their solemn expressions, the fact that they didn't dare gaze at him with contempt as they had just now, and that they even revealed fear and reverence towards him, the young man couldn't help but feel complacent. He glanced at them with disdain and said, "These are the so-called monstrous geniuses of the other territories? They don't seem to be anything great. This lord merely casually revealed a little of my ability, yet it shocked all of you. If this lord were to reveal my entire strength, then wouldn't all of you prostrate yourselves in worship?" The crowd in the surroundings was exasperated when they heard the young man. Since they were able to come to the ancient battlefield, which one of them wasn't one of the best geniuses in their respective territories? Which one of them didn't have his or her own pride? So, even though they were slightly fearful of his saber intent, there were still many who stood forward. A young man who wore a blue robe stood forward. With a flip of his palm, a will-shaped blade had appeared in his hand, and then it started revolving once his profound energy surged into it. The blue-robed young man grunted coldly and said, "You merely possess third-level saber intent, yet you actually dare to look down on us like that. I'm Lu Qing from the 5th rank sect, the Clarity sect in the Western Territory. Please provide me with your guidance." After this young man stood forward, many others had stood forward to challenge the young man who held a saber as well. For a time, he'd simply become the common enemy of everyone here. The young man's eyelids twitched. He hadn't imagined that a casual thing he said would actually make him their common enemy. He was naturally not afraid of one or two, but if it was so many King Realm experts, Then not to mention a King Realm expert who had merely comprehended Saber intent. Even a Spirit Realm expert with Saber intent would have no choice but to flee. Silence! Right at this moment, the Spirit Realm expert who stood on guard outside the heaven entrance shouted abruptly in a stern voice. In an instant, rumbling resounded in the ears of everyone. Some even instantly bled from their 7 apertures. It caused them to be shocked, and they didn't dare continue making noise and had hurriedly fallen silent instead. Xianxia was shocked in his heart because the strength of this Spirit Realm expert had slightly exceeded his expectations. The stern shout from before had actually caused the vital blood in his body to move slightly. If he hadn't reacted quickly and suppressed it forcefully, then he would have probably bled from all 7 apertures just like some of the others in the surroundings. Xianxia grinned when he glanced at the violet mink who was fast asleep on his shoulder. Looks like I was worried for nothing. With how shocking the little fellow's ability is, profounders and dark beasts beneath the Exalt realm are probably unable to injure it at all. Young Master Shiluo glanced at Xianxia, and a wisp of surprise couldn't help but instantly flash through his eyes when he noticed that Xiangxia's expression was calm and completely unfazed. After that, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly while he spoke in a voice that only he could hear. Interesting. The Spirit Realm expert glanced at the crow before he said, I have no intention to go against all of you, but all of you should be aware of a rule. No one is allowed to disturb or act against a profounder that intends to take the heaven entrance. Please deal with your enmity after he has passed through the heaven entrance. As soon as he finished speaking, the Spirit Realm expert gazed at the young man who held a saber and said indifferently, Introduce yourself so that everyone will know that you once tried to traverse the heaven entrance. Even if you fail, you'll be able to bring glory to your sect and the territory you're from. The young man didn't dare act arrogantly as he had just now, and he immediately nodded and said, Elite Disciple Wang Jindao of the 5th rank sect from the Eastern Territory, the Divine Saber Sect. I'm at the 7th rank of the King Realm. My best accomplishment in battle is that I've once surmounted a realm of cultivation to kill a Spirit Realm expert. As he finished speaking, Wang Jindao's tone couldn't help but carry a trace of complacency and pride again. The Spirit Realm expert nodded and said, Then please go ahead. Wang Jindao nodded, and then he walked slowly towards the heaven entrance. Wang Jindao stopped when he arrived in front of the heaven entrance, and then the profound energy within his started surging madly. Suddenly, a glow shot out from within him. As his profound energy surged incessantly, the white glow grew denser and denser, larger and larger. In the end, it was as dazzling as the sun. Looks like he isn't an idiot. He actually knows that he should accumulate strength. Right at this moment, young Master Shiluo had spoken abruptly. What do you mean? Asked Xianxia. Young Master Shiluo turned to look at Xianxia before he said in an extremely serious manner, You really don't know how terrifying the heaven entrance is, who the meaning behind the 4 entrances? Xianxia shook his head and said, Please enlighten me. Young Master Shiluo struck himself on the forehead with his right hand, and then he gazed at Xianxia as he shook his head and said, You actually dared to come to the ancient domain city when you don't even know about the 4 entrances of the city? Awesome. Xianxia frowned. Isn't it just 4 entrances? Young Master Shiluo shook his head and explained. Never mind, this young master is in a good mood because I'll be able to see my Mengmeng. So, I'll explain the origins and meaning of these entrances to you for free. Only the strong are respected on profounder continent. Strength is needed to possess dignity and honor. This is a principle that hasn't changed for eternity. This principle is even more undisguised at ancient domain city. The 4 entrances represent 4 types of status. Those that enter through the heaven entrance possess statuses that are noble like royalty while they're within ancient domain city, and they obtain many benefits in the city. Moreover, they even possess a huge amount of special privileges like being able to kill without breaking the law, being excluded from having to pay for their rooms, and so on and so forth. Of course, most importantly, it was to bring honor to the territory they originated from and the sect or clan that they were from. After all, during the competition for karmic luck throughout the years, the number of experts who were able to pass through the heaven entrance every time could be counted with one's hands. What you mean is that there's danger hidden within the heaven entrance? said Yang Yi with a frown on his face. That fellow with the lousy saber is about to finish accumulating strength, and you'll be able to witness it for yourself in a moment. Young Master Shi Luo grinned as he spoke. Even though he was grinning, Yang Yi sensed that this grin carried slight ill intent instead. Yang Yi shook his head and asked, "Then what about the Earth entrance?" At this moment, he was slightly interested in these 4 entrances. Those that enter through the Earth entrance are like the officials and aristocrats of the mortal world, and they're able to enjoy a huge amount of special privileges. However, it's much more inferior when compared to those who enter through the heaven entrance. You'll understand the difference in the future, so I won't speak further about it. Young Master Shi Luo said, "Let's talk about those who enter through the man entrance. Those who enter through this entrance are like the ordinary commoners of the mortal world. As for the treatment they receive, it definitely can't compare to those who entered through the heaven entrance and earth entrance. Those who entered through the heaven entrance and earth entrance can stay for free within ancient domain city, whereas those who enter via the man entrance have to pay 50 energy stones every single day as their residential fee. 50 energy stones aren't a small amount for some profounders. They even have to pay to stay?" said Yang Yi with an astonished expression on his face. "Of course," Young Master Shi Luo said flatly. "The ancient domain city is the only city in an area of a few 10,000 of kilometers, and it's the only comparatively safe place. Once those fellows from the Nether Territory, Devil Territory, and Demon Territory arrive, then not to mention 50 energy stones, many would pay even if it was 500 energy stones." "What do you mean?" Yang Yi really had the desire to beat this fellow up because this fellow constantly refrained from making everything clear, and it caused Yang Yi to be dazed and confused by all of this. Young Master Shi Luo sighed and said, "Exactly which territory and sect are you from? How could you be ignorant to such an extent?" Yang Ye's face darkened. Does this fellow not know how to hold back when he speaks? Even though Yang Yi really wanted to beat this fellow up, he couldn't because he had to admit that he really was ignorant right now. Young Master Shi Luo shook his head and said, "Even though we're from the various territories, we have a similarity, and it's that we're human. On the other hand, those fellows from the Nether Territory, Devil Territory, and Demon Territory can't be called humans. Those of a different race definitely have ill intent. You have probably heard of such words, right? If they have the chance, then they wouldn't hesitate to kill all of us human profounders. Of course, we're the same. So long as we had the opportunity, then we wouldn't hesitate to annihilate them. Isn't fighting prohibited within the city?" asked Yang Yi with a frown on his face. "Of course. But what about outside the city?" Young Master Shi Luo said, "This area is extremely vast. If you walk straight towards the southwest from the city, you'd arrive at the mysterious ninth hell. If you travel towards the east, you'd arrive at the desert of death that even spirit realm experts wouldn't enter rashly. If you head to the north, you'd be on the path that one had to pass in order to travel to and from the Devil Territory Heaven Tower mountain range. Even though these places are extremely dangerous, there's fortune hidden within them as well. Before the Hidden Dragon Pagoda opens, the members of the various territories would form groups to explore these places to search for treasure or temper themselves. Do you understand now?" Yang Yi nodded. Now he had a slight understanding. Everyone was safe while they were within ancient domain city. But once they left the city to explore and search for treasure, they would lose the protection of the city. Then life and death relied solely upon one's own strength. Of course, one could stay within the city if one was afraid of death. But if one didn't leave the city, then how would one improve one's strength? How would one kill others to steal their treasures? Yang Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about all of this. The fate of others wasn't related to him at all, and it was fine so long as he remained alive. Even though such a way of thinking was slightly selfish, it was the truth, because he believed that no one would care about his fate. After a moment of pondering deeply, Yang Yi asked another question. "Then what about the dog entrance?" "The dog entrance?" Young Master Shi Luo chuckled and said, "Those who enter via the dog entrance are equivalent to the servants in the mortal world. They have no dignity or human rights within the city. Their residences are separated from the rest, and they have to complete a huge amount of labor every single day. Moreover, they have to pay a huge amount of fees to reside in the city as well. To put it simply, their status within the city is even inferior than a dog. Even inferior than a dog. Yang Yi shook his head and said, "Did ancient domain city make these 4 entrances just to divide people according to their strength? People have always been divided according to their strength in this society." Young Master Shi Luo said indifferently, "But it just isn't so undisguised." "You're right." Yang Yi smiled and said, "So long as you possess a formidable strength, then you'll be respected wherever you are. If you're weak, then you'll be bullied and humiliated everywhere as well. You're right. It's just that the rules here are completely undisguised." Young Master Shi Luo glanced at Yang Yi and was just about to speak. Right at this moment, Wang Jindao, who stood in front of the heaven entrance, had suddenly let out a loud shout, and then he stomped his foot on the ground and relied on the counterforce to propel his figure towards the entrance like a cannonball. At the same time, he swiftly slashed the saber in his hand at the heaven entrance. In an instant, the white light around him had instantly transformed into a wild ball of light that shot off in front of him towards the heaven entrance. Wang Jindao didn't hold back this time. With the enhancement from his 3rd-level saber intent, space shook while ear-piercing whistled resounded incessantly like firecrackers everywhere the white energy ball passed. Yang Yi nodded slightly when he witnessed this scene. Even though Wang Jindao's character wasn't really good, his strength was really not bad. If I hadn't attained the King Realm, then I would probably have to utilize 4th-level sword intent, my golden profound energy, and my physical strength in order to withstand this strike of his. But now I naturally don't need to do that. Under the gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the white ball of energy instantly entered the heaven entrance. However, a strand of green light had suddenly shot out from within the heaven entrance at the instant when the white ball of light had just entered, and the white ball of energy immediately exploded into pieces. On the other hand, the green light didn't slow down at all as it shot towards Wang Jindao, who'd entered the heaven entrance. Wang Jindao was astounded, and he didn't hesitate to tighten his grip on his saber and slash forcefully. Clang! A clear and melodious sound of metal breaking resounded abruptly. Yes, Wang Jindao's saber had just come into contact with the green light when it was immediately broken, and then the green light shot through his chest. Wang Jindao was dead. His eyes were opened wide while his mouth was opened slightly as well. He seemed to have intended to say something but didn't have the chance because the green light had instantly obliterated Wang Jindao's vitality when it shot through his chest. And this included his soul, which had been blasted into dispersal. In other words, Wang Jindao was dead in both body and soul. It was instant annihilation. Everyone was stunned. Exactly how terrifying is that green light? Even a 7th-rank King Realm expert that has comprehended 3rd-level saber intent was actually unable to withstand it. Moreover, he was even annihilated instantaneously. My God! Could it be that the might of this green light isn't inferior to an Exalt Realm expert? At this moment, Yang Yi was extremely shocked as well. At this moment, Yang Yi was extremely shocked in his heart, because even he hadn't been able to notice how the green light had appeared and vanished. Of course, the most important aspect was the might of the green light. Such might was already on par with that attack he'd executed with the Dao artifact to defeat Yuan Tong on that day. After feeling shocked, he felt a wave of fear. Yes, it was fear, because if he'd walked in rashly just now and faced such a terrifying strike, then even if he wasn't killed, he would still be heavily injured. Fortunately, Wang Jindao had made and appeared, otherwise, it was very likely that he would have suffered death today. How could the heaven entrance be so easy to traverse? Young Master Shi Luo shook his head and said, "The strength possessed by that fellow with the lousy saber wasn't bad, but he was slightly dumb. If he tried to enter via the earth entrance, then he would still have a chance with the strength he possessed. However, he just had to take the heaven entrance. Now, he's dead." As soon as he finished speaking, young Master Shi Luo turned to look at Yang Yi and said, "Hey, what do you think? Do you still intend to traverse the heaven entrance now?" Yang Yi was just about to say something. However, right at this moment, an expression of happiness suddenly appeared on young Master Shi Luo's face, and then he swiftly turned around and looked towards the distance as he said, "Meng Meng? Huh? Frostface? Why's that detestable fellow with Meng Meng? Does he want to die? As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying, imposing aura surged out explosively from within him. Xianxia's expression changed, and his figure flashed and moved around 10 back. Right after Xianxia had just left the spot, the ground around young Master Shiluo had sunk down by 3 Xianxia's expression instantly became solemn when he witnessed this scene. This fellow's strength is actually so terrifying. Meanwhile, a man and woman had appeared in everyone's fields of vision. The man was handsome, carefree, and elegant, but there was no emotion on his face. He was like a piece of ice, and even if they were extremely far away, others were still able to sense bone-piercing coldness from him. On the other hand, the woman had an extremely beautiful appearance, a delicate figure, and wore a green dress. She was like an orchid that stood alone in an empty gorge, and she emanated an indifferent and tranquil aura. It's Nangong Meng and Li Qingshui who are two of the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory. Heavens! All the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory have shown themselves. Oh my God! It really is them. According to rumor, Li Qingshui and young Master Shiluo both have feelings for Nangong Meng. I don't know whether Li Qingshui likes Nangong Meng, but young Master Shiluo definitely does. Otherwise, how could he have flared up with such rage for no reason? Then who does Nangong Meng like? No one knows. Right at this moment, an explosion suddenly resounded, and then young Master Shiluo suddenly vanished on the spot and shot explosively towards Li Qingshui. Everyone was stunned when they saw young Master Shiluo attack without saying a word, and then they were delighted. Looks like the rumors are true. A love triangle. The woman called Nangong Meng frowned slightly when she saw young Master Shiluo attack as soon as he saw them, and then she flashed forward and obstructed Li Qingshui, who was about to attack as well. Young Master Shiluo was shocked alarmed when he saw Nangong Meng stand in front of Li Qingshui, and then he hurriedly withdrew his attack and stopped 3 in front of Nangong Meng. Young Master Shiluo exclaimed, "Meng Meng, move aside and let me kill this frostface." Nangong Meng sighed and said, "Shiluo, can you act a little seriously? I've told you in the past, I've only taken you and Qingshui to be friends. So, don't keep fighting because of me. Alright? You don't like the 2 of us?" Shiluo was stunned, and then he smiled dryly and said, "Meng Meng, stop joking. Besides the frostface and I, is anyone else from the human world worthy of you? Who else could you like besides the 2 of us?" Nangong Meng shook her head, and she was about to say something when she inadvertently noticed Xianxia. After that, a wisp of fondness flashed in her eyes. She lifted up her fair hand and pointed a finger at Xianxia before she said, "I like it." Qingshui was stunned, and so was Shiluo. On the other hand, the corners of Xiangxia's mouth twitched. The surroundings were perfectly silent, and it was silent to the point it was slightly terrifying. At this moment, everyone was looking at Xianxia, and they were guessing who Xianxia was because he was actually able to make one of the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory, Nangong Meng, confess to him in public. Xianxia was slightly stunned as well. He swore to God that it was the first time he'd met Nangong Meng, but she'd actually confessed to him as soon as they met. Could it be that his charm was already great to such an extent? Xianxia would naturally not think that his charm was so great that one of the geniuses amongst the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory would fall for him as soon as they met. But there didn't seem to be anything wrong with Nangong Meng, so why would she confess to him? Of course, the most important problem was Shiluo and Li Qingshui, who stood by Nangong Meng's side. Because as soon as she'd spoken these words, he'd noticed both of their gazes descend onto him, and they'd even locked onto him with their auras. It looked like it was very likely that they would attack in the next moment. Even though they were the so-called 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory, Xianxia wasn't afraid of them. But even though he wasn't afraid, there was really no need to make enemies for no reason. Moreover, based on that bit of strength that Shiluo had revealed earlier, Xianxia knew that he would have no choice but to flee if they attacked him at once. Young Master Shiluo glanced at Xianxia, and he cleared his throat and gazed at Nangong Meng before he said, "Meng Meng, how How could your taste have become so bad? Just tell me what you like about that fellow? He isn't as handsome as me or that Frostface. His background isn't better than us, and even his cultivation is far inferior to us. How could you have taken a liking to him? Indeed, Li Qingshui, who hadn't spoken until now, had suddenly spoken in agreement. Yang Ye's face darkened when he heard them, but he had no choice but to admit that they were telling the truth. If it was in terms of appearance, he really wasn't as handsome as they were. As for his background, he was merely a labor disciple in the past, so how could he compare to them who were from 9th rank sects? Besides that, he'd just advanced into the king realm, whereas they were at the half-step spirit realm. So, when he thought up to here, Yang Yi instantly felt as if he'd suffered a heavy blow. But this was only for an instant. Nangong Meng blinked. After a short while, she finally figures out that the words she spoke could have been misunderstood, and her fair face flushed red when she recalled what she'd said. After that, she glared at Shi Luo and Li Qingshui before she said, "What were the two of you thinking of? I meant that I like that little fellow on his shoulder. Both of you are really infuriating." The corners of everyone's mouths twitched when they heard Nangong Meng. So she liked that pet beast. All of them moved their gazes from Yang Yi to the violet mink, and they came to an understanding when they saw it. They said to themselves, no wonder one of the three outstanding geniuses from the Central Territory, Nangong Meng, would lose her composure. It's because that violet mink is truly too cute. At this moment, the violet mink had woken up, and its lively eyes spun about as it sized up everyone in the surroundings with a curious gaze. Moreover, it frequently scratched Yang Ye's ear with its little claw. Coupled with its clean, shiny, and fluffy violet fur, the little fellow clearly seemed extraordinarily cute. Yang Ye's expression was slightly stiff right now. Earlier, he'd thought that Nangong Meng had taken a liking to him, yet he hadn't imagined that he was being slightly vain. Even though he didn't have any improper thoughts towards her, he still felt slightly unhappy. Of course, anyone who encountered something like this would probably feel slightly displeased. Shi Luo instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard her, and then he laughed happily and said, "I knew it. How could Meng Meng's taste have become so bad? Right, Meng Meng likes that little fellow? Alright, very good. I just happen to know the owner of that little fellow. I'll go seize it for you." "Oh, I meant I would buy it. Why go to so much trouble?" Right at this moment, Li Qingshui spoke abruptly, and then his figure suddenly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, he'd appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then he stretched out his hand and grabbed right towards the violet mink who was on Yang Ye's shoulder. Yang Ye's expression changed while a savage expression flashed in his eyes. Since Li Qingshui had dared to make a move against the little fellow, he'd definitely touched Yang Ye's reverse scale. Yang Yi didn't hesitate to draw his sword and slash. Yang Yi hadn't utilized his sword intent in this strike, and he merely utilized the strength of his golden profound energy and physical body. Even though it was like that, Yang Yi was at the king realm now. So, the might of the strike was extremely terrifying as well. As soon as he attacked, the countless spectators in the surroundings merely saw a strand of golden light flash by, and it was even to the extent that some hadn't even reacted to the collision between them. At the moment that Yang Yi had drawn his sword, Li Qingshui had frowned slightly, but his expression remained unchanged. With a flip of his palm that was moving towards the violet mink had swiftly changed its direction, and he grabbed Yang Ye's sword in his hand. After that, he said, "Your strength isn't bad, unfortunately." Li Qingshui was about to continue saying something when Yang Yi revealed a cold smile. He instantly added third-level sword intent to the sword, and then he suddenly spun the sword in his hand. Li Qingshui's expression changed, and he hurriedly loosened his grip on Yang Ye's sword. However, he was still a bit too late, and the sword had flashed past his palm and caused a blood-red mark to appear there. But this wasn't the end of it. Yang Yi shook his wrist, and the sword that was enhanced by third-level sword intent flashed like a cunning poisonous snake as it stabbed at Li Qingshui's neck. In Yang Ye's opinion, he would usually not take the initiative to offend anyone, but if others were to offend him, then he would strike with the intention to kill. As for whether he was about to defeat his opponent or not, that was something that he would only consider after they were in battle. When they saw Yang Yi actually utilize sword intent, and it was even at the third level, countless people in the surroundings were stunned. Obviously, they hadn't imagined that this fellow whom they'd constantly overlooked was actually a sword cultivator. Moreover, he was even one that had comprehended sword intent. A wisp of surprise flashed in Shiluo's eyes while he spoke in a low voice. Third-level sword intent, and it's so condensed. Haha. Looks like I underestimated you just now. However, it's a pity because now that you've infuriated this frostface, you'll be crippled even if you're able to survive. Alas, since I got to know him, should I lend him a hand? How troublesome. On the other hand, Nan Gongmeng's beautiful brows were knit together slightly as she stared fixedly at the violet mink on Yang Ye's shoulder. She seemed to be recalling something. When he saw that Yang Yi actually wanted to take his life as well, Li Qingshui's expression turned cold, while the profound energy within his body circulated slightly. In an instant, a skull-sized green ball of light suddenly appeared in front of him, and with a flick of his finger, the green ball of light shot swiftly towards Yang Ye's sword that was stabbing at him. Clang! The sword stabbed the green ball of light, and then the sound of metal colliding instantly resounded. Yang Ye's expression had changed when his sword stabbed the green ball of light because a strand of enormous force had moved along the sword in his hand and caused his arm to go numb. After that, his entire body was blasted flying, and he flew for around 25 m before he finally stopped. As he gazed at the green ball of light that floated in front of Li Qingshui, Yang Yi had a solemn expression. What exactly is that? Even my third-level sword intent was actually unable to harm it at all. Moreover, I was blasted back by it instead. I would have definitely suffered some injury just now if I hadn't reacted swiftly. Right at this moment, Li Qingshui flicked with his finger, and then the green ball of light instantly transformed into a ray of light that shot swiftly towards Yang Yi. Moreover, it was so swift that it caused Yang Ye's expression to instantly change violently, because the green ball of light had already collided with his chest. Bang! Yang Yi was instantly blasted flying, and he flew for almost 60 m before his body smashed to the ground while his fate was unknown. Everyone in the surroundings was astounded. They turned to look at Li Qingshui and saw that the green ball of light had already returned to Li Qingshui. Moreover, it was revolving slowly as if it wasn't the cause of Yang Ye's instant death just now. Young Master Shiluo had suddenly appeared where Yang Yi stood just now, and he gazed at Li Qingshui as he said in a low voice, "Frostface, it isn't really good to act in this way, right? You wanted to seize his possession, but he resisted, so you killed him to seize it. If news of this were to spread, it would bring shame to your Ascension sect." Li Qingshui glanced at Yang Yi, who's crashed to the ground, and spoke indifferently. Too weak. Shiluo frowned. Right at this moment, Yang Yi suddenly started standing up slowly, and the spectators in the surroundings were dumbstruck when they witnessed this scene. This fellow actually resisted a move from Li Qingshui and survived? Shiluo was first stunned when he witnessed this, and then the corners of his mouth curled up slightly while he revealed a wisp of a smile. Li Qingshui frowned. Obviously, he was slightly surprised that Yang Yi had survived his attack. After he stood up, Yang Yi smiled at the violet mink who was about to go on a rampage, and then he stretched out his hand to bring the violet mink into his arms and restrained the little fellow who was about to attack. After that, he gazed at Li Qingshui and said, "It was too weak indeed." As he spoke, Yang Yi shrugged nonchalantly, and then walked slowly towards Li Qingshui. Oh! Li Qingshui's brows raised while the green ball of light that floated in front of him started spinning swiftly. Moreover, strands of terrifying aura were surging out from within it. Yang Yi still continued walking slowly towards Li Qingshui. As they gazed at Yang Yi, the countless spectators in the surroundings instantly revealed expressions of admiration. The three outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory were like a legend there, and they were like mountains that were beyond the reach of others. Not to mention profounders at the King Realm, even some Spirit Realm experts didn't dare rashly offend them. Yet now, a first-rank King Realm sword cultivator intended to challenge Li Qingshui. Not to mention anything else. Just Yang Ye's courage alone had already aroused admiration in their hearts. Shiluo gazed at Yang Yi while the interest in his eyes grew denser. because Yang Yi had truly surprised him by actually surviving a strike of Li Qingshui's heaven-rank dark treasure, the demonic dimension ball. This truly surprised and puzzled him. After all, the demonic dimension ball's might was something that even ordinary spirit realm experts didn't dare resist head-on. Yang Yi stopped when he arrived 30 m away from Li Qingshui, and then the profound energy within his body surged madly, while strands of golden profound energy moved along his meridians and into the sword in his grasp. As his golden profound energy surged ceaselessly into it, a dazzling golden glow immediately erupted from Yang Ye's sword. At the same time, a faint violet glow flashed into appearance on the little claw of the violet mink who stood on Yang Ye's shoulder. At this moment, the violet mink was extremely angry, and it was glaring at Li Qingshui. If it wasn't because Yang Yi had stopped it just now, then it would have shot a few hundred violet-colored energy swords at Li Qingshui by now. Meanwhile, Li Qingshui suddenly said, "Since you've comprehended third-level sword intent, I presume you're not just a nobody. I really am curious about which territory and sect you belong to." The crowd in the surroundings immediately converged their gazes onto Yang Yi when they heard Li Qingshui. Obviously, they wanted to know which territory Yang Yi came from as well. "Is there any point?" Yang Yi laughed with ridicule. "Right?" Li Qingshui nodded and said, "It really is pointless to ask such a question to someone who's about to die." Right at this moment, Nangong Meng suddenly vanished on the spot and appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then she looked carefully at the violet mink. After a short while, she took a deep breath while a wisp of shock arose in her eyes before she gazed at Yang Yi and asked, Why would it be by your side?" Yang Yi frowned and said, "What do you mean by that?" Nangong Meng said with a low voice, "Don't tell me that you're unaware of its background." Yang Ye's eyelids twitched. Does she mean she knows the little fellow's background? How was she able to notice that the violet mink is a demon beast? Yang Yi shook his head and said, "This doesn't seem to have anything to do with you, right?" A wisp of anger flashed through Nangong Meng's eyes because no one amongst the younger generation dared to speak to her in such a way. However, she didn't flare up, and her tone became slightly gentler as she said, "Allow me to apologize for what happened just now. I don't have any ill intent towards you and it, and I merely felt extremely fond of it because it was cute. But I never imagined that it was actually from that clan." "You didn't have any ill intent?" Yang Yi laughed with ridicule, and then he gazed at Li Qingshui and said, "This is what you call having no ill intent? If I didn't possess some strength, then I would probably be dead now, right? Do you really want to die?" Meanwhile, Li Qingshui gazed at Yang Yi and spoke indifferently. "You can give it a try?" Yang Ye's eyes narrowed as he smiled coldly. A wisp of killing intent flashed in Li Qingshui's eyes, and he was just about to attack when Nangong Meng shook her head towards him before she gazed at Yang Yi and said, "The incident from before really was our mistake. I hope you don't take it to heart. Farewell." As soon as she finished speaking, Nangong Meng glanced at the violet mink on Yang Ye's shoulder with a complicated expression, and then she walked towards the heaven entrance. Li Qingshui glanced coldly at Yang Yi and said, "You're dead if this happens again." As soon as he finished speaking, he hurriedly went after Nangong Meng. Shi Luo walked over to Yang Yi and sized him up from top to bottom before he said, "Tsk. I truly didn't expect that you actually possess third-level sword intent, and this physical body of yours is actually strong to such an extent. Even that damn ball was unable to harm you. Unfortunately, you've offended that Frostface and he's very petty. So, he'll definitely come looking for trouble with you in the future." "Whatever." Yang Yi shrugged, and then he glanced at Shi Luo and said, "Actually, aren't the three of you together?" "Tui," Shi Luo growled. "I'm not with that Frostface. That Frostface is usually reticent, silent, and acts cool, but he's actually full of tricks. If my strength wasn't quite good, then I would have been cut apart and fed to dark beasts by him a very long time ago." Yang Yi said abruptly, "I think that you're not a match for him. Trying to provoke me into action?" Shi Luo chuckled and said, "Don't play such tricks in front of this young master. If it wasn't for the fact that we have to deal with those fellows from the demon territory, nether territory, and devil territory, I would have had a huge battle with him just now. Right, out of consideration that we've become acquainted, I'll give you a word of advice. If you encounter that frost face while you're alone, then run as far as you can. Let me tell you a secret, he has killed numerous spirit realm experts on his own. Haha, spirit realm experts? Xianxia's eyes narrowed while a solemn expression appeared in his eyes. Even though he disliked Li Qingshui, he had to admit that Li Qingshui's strength was truly extremely terrifying, especially that green ball of light. Earlier, it had actually struck him before he could even react and blasted him flying. After all, his physical body wasn't inferior to an ordinary spirit rank dark beast right now. However, it was exactly such a physical body that had been blasted flying. Moreover, the vital energy within his body roiled to the point he almost suffered an internal injury. Most importantly, he felt that it was only a casual attack from Li Qingshui. In other words, Li Qingshui hadn't attacked seriously at all, and just that casual attack had blasted Xianxia flying. Before he encountered Li Qingshui, Xianxia felt that he wasn't inferior to anyone amongst his peers. However, the cruel facts from before told him that he was still very weak amongst King Realm experts. There's always someone stronger and better in the world. This famous saying has always been truth itself. Xianxia took a deep breath. He'd decided that he would head to the ninth hell and find the ninth hell cold gale as soon as possible, and it was best if he could find it before the hidden dragon pagoda was opened. Otherwise, if he went against Li Qingshui with the strength he possessed right now, then he would definitely lose if he didn't utilize the nether ghost flame and his 5th level sword intent. Moreover, he wasn't confident in his ability to defeat Li Qingshui even if he utilized them. After all, Li Qingshui was from a 9th rank sect, so would he lack treasures and cultivation techniques? Would he be inferior to Xianxia? The answer was naturally no. At this moment, the others within the city had somehow found out that the 3 outstanding geniuses of the Central Territory were about to traverse the heaven entrance. So, countless profounders had surged out from within the city, and it wasn't long before no less than a few tens of thousands of profounders had arrived in the surroundings. Moreover, this number was increasing incessantly. The heaven entrance was undoubtedly a terrifying existence to the countless spectators in the surroundings. Not to mention the heaven entrance, the countless spectators in the crowd didn't even dare to try traversing the earth entrance. Because if one were to die within the heaven entrance or earth entrance, then it would mean the destruction of both body and soul. It made it impossible for them to even have a chance at reincarnation. Nangong Meng walked slowly to the heaven entrance, and then she nodded lightly to both the spirit realm experts who stood outside it before she said, Nangong Meng, an elite disciple of the 9th rank sect, the Pure River sect. I'm at the peak of the King realm. The spirit realm expert on the left nodded slightly and said, Have you made up your mind? Of course. Nangong Meng nodded. Then please go ahead. The spirit realm expert on the right spoke indifferently. Nangong Meng flipped her palm, and a mirror appeared there. This mirror was round and had numerous strange diagrams inscribed on its back. The borders of the mirror even had many marks that seemed like bolts of lightning. In short, based on its outward appearance alone, there didn't seem to be anything special or outstanding about this mirror. However, the expressions of those 2 spirit realm experts had changed when they saw the mirror, and the expert on the left said in a low voice, Little girl, is that the low-grade heaven-rank dark treasure, spirit illumination mirror? Nangong Meng nodded and said, Excuse me for using it, but I have no other choice. The heaven entrance's attack is equivalent to the attack of a 5th-rank spirit realm expert who didn't rely on any external forces to advance to such a realm of cultivation. So, with the strength I possess right now, I can only rely on a heaven-rank dark treasure to resist it. The spirit realm expert on the right shook his head and said, Little girl, you're being too modest. Throughout history, has there been anyone besides a small handful of people who were able to pass through the heaven entrance without relying on an external source of strength? It seems to have been a few thousand years since someone who traversed the heaven entrance without relying on any external sources of strength has appeared. The spirit realm expert on the left nodded and said, Indeed, one hasn't appeared for a few thousand years. not to mention those that don't rely on any external sources of strength. Even if it's those who relied on such external sources of strength to traverse the heaven entrance, there have only been a few dozen throughout the last few thousand years. Your strength isn't bad, so you'll almost definitely be able to pass through the earth entrance if you choose it. However, if you choose the heaven entrance, then the slightest carelessness would end in death. You have to think it through. I truly don't wish to see our central territory lose an extraordinary genius. Nangong Meng grinned and said, "Thank you for the reminder, seniors. However, I still insist on trying, otherwise, I would be disgruntled my whole life." These two spirit realm experts exchanged glances when they heard this, and then they sighed in unison before moving aside. Indeed, if a genius like Nangong Meng wasn't allowed to try the heaven entrance, then it would be an eternal knot in her heart. Perhaps it wouldn't affect her in the beginning, but it would be lethal once she attained the monarch realm. So, they didn't obstruct her. Nangong Meng walked slowly towards the heaven entrance, and her expressions turned solemn as she gazed at it. This entrance didn't just represent a matter of dignity, it was also related to her own mental state. The path of cultivation was filled with countless difficulties. If she wasn't confident and was obstructed by this insignificant door, then how could she overcome the difficulties throughout her path and attain the peak of the martial Tao? So, she had to traverse the heaven entrance. Shi Luo and Li Qingshui fell silent. They didn't stop her because they understood her actions. The countless spectators in the surroundings instantly shot their gazes towards Nangong Meng, because nothing was more exciting than witnessing the rise or fall of geniuses. At this moment, Xianxia's gaze was on her as well. He'd witnessed how terrifying the heaven entrance was just now. Truthfully speaking, he wasn't confident in his ability to pass through it, because if it merely attacked once, then he would naturally be able to overcome the attack. However, the problem was whether the heaven entrance would only launch a single attack. Moreover, he didn't know whether the heaven entrance had even more terrifying attacks. In short, he wasn't very confident in his ability to pass through it. However, he would definitely attempt it. Just like Nangong Meng, Yang Yi wouldn't tolerate any flaws in his mental state. Under the gazes of countless people, Nangong Meng raised her foot and stepped into the heaven entrance. Nangong Meng had just stepped foot into the heaven entrance when a strand of energy fluctuation arose within it. After that, a ray of green light appeared out of thin air within the heaven entrance, and it shot swiftly towards Nangong Meng at a speed that countless people in the surroundings were unable to react to. Nangong Meng's expression turned solemn as she gazed at the green ray of light. Her sect had told her countless times about how terrifying the heaven entrance was, and it was even to the extent that those elders of the sect prohibited her from trying to enter through it because they were worried that she would suffer a mishap. However, she'd still done it in the end, because she was extremely confident of her own strength. But now, when she personally experienced the heaven entrance, she knew that she'd been always underestimating the heaven entrance. However, a released arrow couldn't return to the bow. At this moment, she had no paths of retreat, because retreat was equivalent to death. So, a wisp of a fierce expression flashed in her eyes while she shook her hand lightly, and then the spirit illumination mirror instantly moved towards the ray of green light. Under the astounded gazes of all the spectators, the ray of green light collided with the spirit illumination mirror. There was no explosion or any fluctuation of energy, because as soon as it came into contact with the mirror, the ray of green light and instantly vanished as if it had entered the mirror. The crowd of spectators was dumbstruck. That terrifying attack of the heaven entrance vanished just like that? Yang Yi frowned as well. He'd personally witnessed how terrifying the green light was. It was an attack that was on par with a full-force strike of a spirit realm expert who hadn't relied on any external sources of strength to advance into the spirit realm. However, it had vanished just like that. Exactly what is that mirror to actually be so terrifying? The spirit illumination mirror is a heaven-ranked defensive dark treasure, and it's said to be able to absorb all attacks in the world. Of course, it isn't that terrifying. However, it can still absorb the attacks from combat techniques below the heaven rank and the attacks of spirit realm experts. Moreover, after it absorbs these attacks, it can reflect them back. That's the most terrifying ability of the mirror. Shiluo seemed to know that Yang Yi was puzzled and spoke indifferently from the side. Yang Yi smiled bitterly when he heard this. A heaven-rank defensive dark treasure. In other words, with that mirror in her possession, she's already invincible in a battle with her peers. All other profounders who don't possess heaven-rank treasures will be unable to harm her at all. If that was the case, then how the heck would anyone be able to fight her? At the heaven entrance, Nan Gongmeng hadn't relaxed when the spirit illumination mirror absorbed that strand of green light, and her expression had turned solemn instead. Because only she knew that even if the ray of green light was just a little bit stronger, then the mirror in her hand might have collapsed. The might of the heaven entrance had completely exceeded her imagination. After a moment of silence, another ray of green light suddenly flashed into appearance. This ray of green light was much larger than the ray of green light from before, and its speed was much faster as well. Nan Gongmeng's pupils constricted while she hurriedly waved her fair hand. White light suddenly erupted from the mirror, and then a ray of green light suddenly shot out violently from within the mirror. The two rays of green light had just come into contact in midair when the ray of green light that shot out explosively from within the mirror had rumbled and dispersed. On the other hand, the ray of green light from the heaven entrance didn't slow down as it struck onto Nan Gongmeng's spirit illumination mirror. Crack! The green light vanished mysteriously, just as it had before this. However, everyone heard a light crack this time. Those with comparatively discerning gazes had noticed that some fine cracks had appeared on the borders of the mirror. Countless people instantly gasped when they witnessed this because the second attack from the heaven entrance was actually so terrifying to the point of being capable of damaging a heaven-rank treasure. If we were to enter the heaven entrance and didn't possess heaven-rank treasures to resist it, when they thought up to here, cold sweat emerged from countless people. They who didn't possess heaven-rank treasure would probably be instantly annihilated just like Wang Jindao had. Shi Luo and Li Qingshui frowned while worry appeared simultaneously in their eyes. The might of the heaven entrance had completely exceeded their expectations. In other words, they who were originally confident in Nan Gongmeng couldn't help but waver slightly when they witnessed this scene. At this moment, Yang Yi felt lucky in his heart. Yes, he felt lucky because if he'd entered rashly just now and this terrifying attack took him by surprise, and especially if it was this second ray of green light, then he would definitely be heavily injured, and his life might have been in danger as well. Needless to say, the might of the heaven entrance had completely exceeded his imagination. Not to mention King Realm experts, even some Spirit Realm experts would probably be obliterated as well. Right at this moment, another wave of energy fluctuation arose in the heaven entrance, and then another strand of green light appeared out of thin air. This time, Nan Gongmeng's pupils instantly constricted when she saw it because it was more than 2 times stronger than the ray of green light from before. Moreover, its speed was so swift that even she couldn't see it clearly. Nan Gongmeng's reaction wasn't slow, and she immediately made her profound energy surged violently into the mirror, causing a strand of dazzling white light to instantly erupt from it. After that, another ray of green light shot out violently from within the mirror. As soon as the green lights came into contact with each other in midair, the ray of green light from the mirror had been instantly dispersed just like before, and then the ray of green light from the heaven entrance blasted onto the mirror. Under the astounded gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the spirit illumination mirror trembled slightly before a bang resounded, and then it exploded into pieces. However, the ray of green light hadn't vanished, and it didn't slow down as it shot explosively towards Nan Gongmeng. Li Qingshui and Shi Luo's expressions changed when they witnessed this scene. Right when the two of them were about to act, the 2 spirit realm experts who stood on guard outside the heaven entrance had appeared mysteriously in front of Li Qingshui and Shi Luo, and they obstructed their path. Obliterate! Right at this moment, a light shout resounded from within the heaven entrance. Everyone looked over and saw Nan Gongmeng wave her palm forward before clenching it lightly. In the next moment, a fist-sized, pitch-black, and horrifying black hole suddenly appeared in front of Nan Gongmeng's hand. In merely an instant, the black hole had expanded a few times, and it swallowed the ray of green light. Someone in the surroundings exclaimed upon witnessing this scene. The mid-grade heaven rank combat technique. Obliterate. Mid-grade heaven rank. Yang Ye's expression changed when he heard this. This was the first time he'd seen a mid-grade heaven rank technique being executed. In the past, he felt that even if there was a gap between low-grade and mid-grade heaven rank techniques, it would definitely not be a huge gap. However, after he witnessed this scene, he had no choice but to admit that his thoughts were mistaken. The gap between a low-grade and mid-grade heaven rank technique wasn't just a little bit, it was a huge amount of little bits. Even some spirit realm experts were definitely unable to withstand the might of that third ray of green light, but a mid-grade heaven rank technique had directly swallowed it whole. Presently, Yang Yi slightly believed the rumors about Nangong Meng, Li Qingshui, and Shi Luo having jointly killed an Exalt realm expert. Nangong Meng instantly heaved a sigh of relief when she saw the ray of green light being completely swallowed, and then she fell to a seated position on the ground. The attack from before had completely exhausted the profound energy within her body, so there wasn't even a drop of profound energy left within her right now. At this moment, even the most ordinary profounder could kill her. However, fortunately, she'd passed through the heaven entrance, because the heaven entrance had always attacked just 3 times. After a moment of silence, thunderous cheers suddenly resounded in the surroundings. No matter which territory they belonged to, experts ought to be respected. Of course, most people felt shocked and helpless. They were the best geniuses in their respective territories, and they were the most dazzling existences there as well. But when they compared themselves to Nangong Meng right now, they instantly felt that they truly didn't deserve the title of monstrous genius. What was a true monstrous genius like? Someone like Nangong Meng. Yang Yi was silent. He had no choice but to admit that he was truly slightly shocked by Nangong Meng's strength, especially the heaven rank technique she'd executed at the end. Even though heaven rank techniques were terrifying, the most terrifying aspect was that she'd cultivated it to the point it was on the verge of perfection. Yes, it was on the verge of perfection. Earlier, when Nangong Meng had executed that heaven rank technique, Yang Yi, who possessed the enlightened sword heart, had only been able to notice a slight flaw in it after observing it with his full concentration. However, this flaw couldn't even be considered a flaw because she truly executed it too swiftly. So the flaw had vanished right after it appeared. In other words, even if he'd noticed the flaw in her attack, Yang Yi was helpless against it. This was the first time he'd encountered such a situation since he'd attained the enlightened sword heart. Yang Yi, who was in deep thought, hadn't noticed that the violet mink on his shoulder was blinking, and faint violet light had flashed on its little claws. Moreover, its gaze was on the heaven entrance. The 2 spirit realm experts in front of the heaven entrance nodded as well, because Nangong Meng's success could be considered to have brought glory to the Central Territory. So, as members of the Central Territory, they were naturally happy as well. Li Qingshui and Shi Luo heaved sighs of relief. Earlier, both of them were terrified as they watched Nangong Meng, especially during the final attack of the heaven entrance. It had completely exceeded their expectations. If Nangong Meng hadn't cultivated that heaven rank technique to the advanced stage, then she would have definitely perished, because the might of that final strike was utterly not something that their physical bodies could endure. The 2 of them exchanged glances before Shi Luo said, "Will you be going first, or should I?" "It's up to you." Li Qingshui was a man of few words. Shi Luo nodded and said, "Then I'll go first." The corners of Li Qingshui's mouth twitched as he glanced indifferently at Shi Luo. Right when Shi Luo was about to walk towards the heaven entrance, a strand of violet light had flashed by as the violet mink on Yang Ye's shoulder had suddenly vanished. In the next moment, it had appeared within the heaven entrance. The countless spectators in the surroundings were stunned when they witnessed this scene. On the other hand, Yang Ye's expression changed violently, and he didn't hesitate to utilize his movement technique to its limits. He transformed into a black ray of light that shot explosively towards the heaven entrance. "It's Yang Yi." At the instant that Yang Yi charged out from the crowd, some profounders from the Southern Territory had recognized him and instantly exclaimed with surprise. When they heard this, all the other profounders from the Southern Territory gazed simultaneously at Yang Yi, who was charging towards the heaven entrance. Just as Yang Yi had said, he could really be considered as a famous person amongst the younger generation of the Southern Territory. He defeated the quasi-martial god of the Southern Territory, obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings, and comprehended 4th-level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart. However, even though all the profounders of the Southern Territory's younger generation were hostile towards Yang Yi because of the incident on Ascension Mountain Range during the Ascension rankings, they had no choice but to admit that Yang Yi's strength was extremely terrifying. They were just unwilling to admit that Yang Yi was the strongest amongst the younger generation of the Southern Territory. Now, when they saw Yang Yi actually intended to traverse the heaven entrance, all of them felt excited. Why were they excited? The current situation of the Southern Territory's profounders within ancient domain city had to be explained for that. All of them present here were the most elite disciples of the Southern Territory, and they'd once thought that they were the greatest monstrous geniuses. However, only after they arrived here had they realized that the Southern Territory was the weakest amongst the various territories. Amongst the 4 entrances, there was actually not a single person that had passed through the Earth entrance. Even Yuan Tong, Wan Renyu, and Lang Xinran, whom the profounders of the Southern Territory had entrusted great hopes to, were only able to pass through the man entrance. As for the others, practically all of them had entered through the dog entrance. So, the profounders of the Southern Territory weren't even able to walk with their heads held high within ancient domain city. At the same time, they'd become the lowest of the low in the city. They were the most dazzling existences in the Southern Territory, but they were at the bottom in ancient domain city. The profounders of the Southern Territory found it very difficult to get accustomed to such a difference, but what else could they do but adapt to it? It was their fault for possessing inferior strengths. How could the rules of ancient domain city be something they could break? Moreover, most importantly, the profounders of the Southern Territory had become existences that were bullied in the city. Why were they bullied? Because they were weak. Because no one from the Southern Territory had passed through the Earth entrance. Yet now, Yang Yi was attempting to traverse the heaven entrance. At this moment, the countless profounders from the Southern Territory had tacitly forgotten how they treated Yang Yi in the past. At this moment, they really worked hard to cheer and clap for Yang Yi. At this moment, they sincerely hoped that Yang Yi was able to create a miracle again and allow the Southern Territory to have a genius that had passed through the heaven entrance so that they could hold their heads up high. In the crowd, a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in the eyes of Wan Renyu, Lang Xinran, and Yuan Tong as they gazed at Yang Yi, who charged into the heaven entrance. Especially Yuan Tong. His emotions were the most complicated. In all honesty, he hated Yang Yi because Yang Yi made him lose the inheritance of the martial god. However, he felt gratitude towards Yang Yi as well, because that battle during the Ascension rankings had allowed him to gain a completely new understanding of himself. It was Yang Yi who allowed him to realize his insufficiencies. It was Yang Yi who made him realize that there was always someone stronger in the world. Moreover, it was Yang Yi that made him understand that his strength was still too weak. So, after the Ascension rankings came to an end, Yuan Tong hadn't become dispirited at all, and he'd aroused an unprecedented will to fight instead, allowing him to break through into the King realm in one go. It was exactly because of this that he was able to make the Origin School attach importance to him once more and send him to participate in this battle for karmic luck. After he broke through into the King realm, he was prepared to seek out Yang Yi and cleanse himself of his past humiliations. However, he found out to his disappointment that Yang Yi had actually chosen to traverse the Grand Myriad Mountains alone and travel to ancient domain city on foot. This caused his plans to fail, and he had no choice but to plan to challenge Yang Yi after he met Yang Yi at ancient domain city. However, he'd never imagined that once he'd arrived at ancient domain city, he, Yuan Tong, would actually be so weak. Yes, amongst the 4 entrances, the Origin School had already instructed him that he couldn't attempt to pass through the heaven entrance. So he'd chosen the earth entrance. However, to his disbelief, he, Yuan Tong, who was said to be the greatest monstrous genius in the Southern Territory, was actually not even able to pass through the earth entrance. If the Origin School hadn't given him a heaven-rank defensive treasure, then he would already be dead right now. At the moment he failed, he sensed the undisguised disappointment from all the profounders of the Southern Territory, and there were even some that insulted and cursed him. He didn't blame them because he'd given them hope, yet he'd failed. His failure wasn't just a personal failure, it had even made all the profounders of the Southern Territory to be unable to hold their heads up high in the city. Now, at the moment he saw Yang Yi charge into the heaven entrance, he suddenly noticed that he didn't hate Yang Yi anymore. At this moment, he was just like the others, and he hoped that Yang Yi would be able to pass through the heaven entrance. Even though it was slightly impossible, he felt just like everyone else, and he sincerely hoped that Yang Yi would be able to create another miracle. It could be said that Yang Yi was the one and only existence who could change the current situation faced by the profounders of the Southern Territory. He's that Yang Yi from the Southern Territory who's said to be the quasi-sword emperor? Fourth level sword intent? The enlightened sword heart? Him. A profounder from one of the other territories instantly spoke with bewilderment when he heard the cheers of those profounders from the Southern Territory. Perhaps he does possess fourth level sword intent. Otherwise, it's impossible for him to dare challenge Li Qingshui. However, the enlightened sword heart is probably just a rumor. What a joke! I haven't even heard of anyone in the Central Territory that possesses the enlightened sword heart. How could such a genius appear in the Southern Territory? Even if he doesn't possess the enlightened sword heart, it's extremely terrifying even if he has merely comprehended fourth-level sword intent. A sword cultivator that possesses fourth-level sword intent is almost unrivaled amongst his peers. However, if he intends to pass through the heaven entrance by relying on fourth-level sword intent, then he's dreaming. Yang Yi. Young Master Shi Luo grinned and said, "Fourth-level sword intent? The enlightened sword heart? The quasi-sword emperor? Haha! How interesting!" At the moment that the violet mink had flashed into the heaven entrance, Yang Yi was truly frightened out of his wits. He'd personally witnessed how terrifying the heaven entrance was. Yet the little fellow had actually entered it directly. So, how could he not be anxious? So, he didn't hesitate to enter with the little fellow. At that moment, he hadn't thought about how terrifying the heaven entrance was or whether he would die in it. There was only a single thought in his mind, and it was to keep the little fellow safe. In the heaven entrance, the violet mink's eyes instantly narrowed when it saw Yang Yi follow it in here, and then it revealed a cute smile. Obviously, it thought that Yang Yi had come to play with it. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched. Right when he was about to hold the violet mink in his arms and give it a good beating, a wave of energy fluctuation suddenly arose from within the heaven entrance. After that, a ray of green light flashed into appearance once more, and it shot explosively towards the violet mink and Yang Yi. Yang Ye's expression instantly changed violently when he saw this scene, and then his figure flashed to stand before the violet mink. After that, fourth-level sword intent surged out at the same time that he drew his sword and slashed it forcefully at that ray of green light. How could Yang Yi dare to be careless when he'd witnessed how terrifying the rays of green light were? So, he directly utilized fourth-level sword intent at this moment, and he'd even utilized the might of his golden profound energy and physical body. This was definitely a full-force attack of Yang Ye's, and its might was extremely terrifying. Everywhere his sword passed, numerous explosions resounded successively. Moreover, the space throughout the sword's path even showed faint signs of warping. Li Qingshui's brows raised when he witnessed this scene, while Shi Luo, who stood by Li Qingshui's side, instantly said, "It really is fourth-level sword intent. Haha! Frostface, I originally thought that he wouldn't be a match for you. But now it would seem like even though it's impossible for him to defeat you, he definitely possesses the ability to fight you with the fourth-level sword intent that he possesses." Li Qingshui withdrew his gaze, glanced at Shi Luo, and then remained silent. Shi Luo chuckled, and then he gazed at the heaven entrance. Nan Gongmeng stood by their side and stared fixedly at the violet mink, and her eyes were filled with bewilderment. Under the gazes of everyone in the surroundings, Yang Ye's attack collided forcefully with the ray of green light. In an instant, everyone heard the clear and resounding sound of metal breaking as the sword in Yang Ye's hand instantly broke into countless pieces. After that, a terrifying wave of air suddenly erupted from the point of collision. Bang! In an instant, The ground was blasted apart while countless rocks shot violently towards the surroundings like a rain of arrows. The surroundings were in a mess. The hearts of the profounders from the southern territory had instantly risen to their throats when they witnessed this scene. If it was in the past, they would wish for nothing more than to see Xianxia perish. But not now. If Xianxia was to fail now, then the situation they faced in ancient Domain City would only grow worse before becoming existences that were eternally bullied in the city. So Xianxia absolutely couldn't die. At the very least, he couldn't die right now. At this moment, Xianxia wasn't aware that numerous people were worried about him. After a short moment, the spectators could see the situation within the heaven entrance clearly. At this moment, Xianxia was in an extremely sorry state. His hair was disheveled and hung down loosely to his shoulders, and the clothes he wore were riddled. It was like he'd suffered a rain of arrows. In next to no time, their gazes had descended onto his right hand, and they noticed that his right hand had turned blood red. Yes, Xianxia's entire right arm had turned blood red. If someone stood by his side, that person would notice that his entire arm was struck to the point it was on the verge of falling apart. Fine cracks had spread like spiderwebs throughout his arm while strands of blood were slowly flowing out ceaselessly from his right arm. Nangong Meng's gaze descended onto Xianxia's right arm, and then her expression turned solemn. She'd personally experienced the might of the first attack from the heaven entrance, and she'd only been able to withstand that attack by relying on a heaven-rank treasure. However, at this moment, Xianxia had relied on nothing but an earth-rank sword to withstand that attack. Moreover, he'd forcefully blasted that ray of green light into pieces. This fellow Xianxia's strength is actually so terrifying. Li Qingshui's expression had turned slightly solemn as well. Obviously, he hadn't expected that Xianxia would be able to withstand that terrifying attack by relying solely on an earth-rank sword. Of course, he was even more puzzled because it was absolutely impossible to rely on 4th-level sword intent alone to blast that attack into pieces. In other words, Xianxia had definitely utilized other abilities just now. But so what? Li Qingshui's expression recovered its calm. Not to mention 4th-level sword intent, what would he have to fear even if Xianxia really possessed the enlightened sword heart? Because Xianxia was only a first-rank King Realm profounder in the end. The gap in their cultivations wasn't something that 4th-level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart could make up for. Surmounting ranks of cultivation to do battle? What a joke! How could anyone in this world do that to him? At this moment, the happiest amongst the people in the surroundings were definitely those profounders from the southern territory. After they recovered from the shock of witnessing Xianxia actually being able to forcefully resist an attack from the heaven entrance, they completely seethed with excitement. Earlier, they merely hoped that Xianxia could pass through the heaven entrance. Yes, they only hoped for it but didn't look favorably upon Xianxia. But now they believed it was possible. They felt that Xianxia would definitely be able to create another miracle. At this moment, Xianxia's expression was extremely solemn because the terrifying attack from the heaven entrance just now had almost blasted off his entire arm. His physical defensive was already on par with an ordinary spirit-rank dark beast. Moreover, he'd utilize his 4th-level sword intent and golden profound energy just now. However, even then, he'd still almost lost his arm. The attack of the heaven entrance was actually that terrifying. Right at this moment, another faint fluctuation of energy arose from within the heaven entrance. Xianxia's pupils constricted when he witnessed this scene. Right when he was about to utilize 5th-level sword intent, a ray of green light had shot out like a bolt of lightning from within the heaven entrance. This ray of green light was extremely swift, and it struck his chest before he could even react. Xianxia's eyes instantly opened wide when he was struck by the green light, and his face instantly warped. After a moment of silence, a bang resounded. Xianxia's clothes instantly transformed into ash and bared his entire body, and when the spectators saw the state Xianxia was in, all of them were stunned. At this moment, Xianxia's entire body seemed like glass that had suffered a heavy blow but hadn't shattered into pieces yet, and his entire body was densely covered in bloody marks. Yes, Xianxia's entire body had cracked apart right now. Moreover, countless strands of blood were slowly flowing out from within his body. In next to no time, Yang Yi seemed as if he was made of blood, and he looked extremely hideous and terrifying. Nangong Meng shook her head slightly when she witnessed this scene. How could he possibly survive when he doesn't possess any heaven-rank treasures and entered rashly without being mentally prepared at all? However, even though he's about to die, he'll die a glorious death. After all, he forcefully resisted a terrifying attack from the heaven entrance. Young Master Shiluo, who stood on Nangong Meng's right, shook his head slightly as well, and a wisp of pity flashed in his eyes when he gazed at Yang Yi, who seemed like a person made out of blood, because he could have stopped Yang Yi from entering the heaven entrance just now. But he wanted to witness Yang Yi's strength, so he hadn't made a move to stop Yang Yi. However, he hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually die just like that. At this moment, the people with the worst expressions were definitely those profounders from the Southern Territory. Just a moment ago, Yang Yi had given them hope, but in the next moment, he'd made them fall into despair. When they thought about how they would never be able to hold their heads up high and be reduced to the servants of the profounders from the other territories in ancient Domain City, the countless profounders from the Southern Territory were unable to restrain their emotions, and they started to curse at Yang Yi, who was in the heaven entrance. Yang Yi, don't you fucking die. Aren't you said to be the greatest monstrous genius in the Southern Territory? Aren't you the future Sword Emperor? Don't you possess the enlightened sword heart? How can you fucking die? How can you fucking die? Yang Yi, fucking move. You idiot. Weren't you extremely formidable? Didn't you possess a physical defense comparable to a king-rank dark beast? Why can't you even withstand one fucking single blow of the heaven entrance? Ha. Is he dead? Good. Ha. The quasi-sword emperor? The enlightened sword heart? He's just like us. He's considered to be formidable in the Southern Territory. But he turns into trash once he's here at ancient Domain City. We're all just trash. Ha. Is he really dead? Yuan Tong stood amongst the crowd as he gazed at Yang Yi, who seemed like a person made out of blood, and he muttered in a low voice that carried dejection. How could you have died just like that? If you've died, then who would I got looking for to retrieve my determination to become the martial god which I lost to you? Amongst the people in the surroundings, there was another group of people that were extremely happy right now, and it was the group from the Sword Sect. At this moment, a heartfelt smile had appeared on Jian Wuji's face. Yang Yi wasn't a disciple of the Sword Sect anymore, and Yang Yi was even a disciple who'd been kicked out from the Sword Sect. So, the stronger Yang Yi was, the greater the slap to the Sword Sect's face was. As a disciple of the Sword Sect, he naturally didn't wish for his sect to be laughed at by others. Of course, the most important reason was that if Yang Yi really passed through the heaven entrance, then with the status in the city possessed by those who've passed through the heaven entrance and coupled with what the Sword Sect had done to Yang Yi in the past, how could Yang Yi possibly let them off? In his opinion, it was definitely impossible. At that time, once Yang Yi possessed special privileges in the city, then it would definitely be the end for all of them from the Sword Sect. However, he didn't have to worry about all of that now because Yang Yi was dead. Are you really dead? Somewhere within the crowd, Wenren Yu gazed at Yang Yi while she said in a light voice, "If you're dead, then what would your younger sister do? What would Auntie Yu do? How could you just die like that?" Had Yang Yi really died? Of course he hadn't, but he was on the verge of it. At this moment, Yang Yi didn't even dare take a large breath as he was deeply afraid that his body would instantly shatter into countless pieces. It could be said that the extent of his current injuries was the most severe he'd ever experienced in his entire lifetime, because his entire body had really been struck to the point it had shattered, and if his physical body wasn't formidable to the extreme, he would have probably been transformed into a pile of mush by now. Even though he'd relied on the defensive ability of his physical body to barely remain alive now, he might die at any moment, because his blood was flowing endlessly, and fine cracks were ceaselessly spreading throughout his body. When Yang Yi was struck by the second ray of green light, the chief culprit, the violet mink, was instantly stunned in midair. As it watched more and more blood flow from Yang Yi while his condition grew worse and worse, 2 streams of tears instantly started flowing slowly from its lively eyes. It stretched its little claw out towards Yang Yi but was afraid of causing Yang Yi pain, so it withdrew its claw once more. For a time, the violet mink was anxious to the point it ceaselessly flickered around Yang Yi. When they witnessed this scene, the expressions of everyone in the surroundings instantly changed. Teleportation. Shi Luo cried out involuntarily. It's a demon beast. For the very first time, Li Qingshui revealed an expression of shock. He didn't speak but just stared fixedly at the violet mink, as if he wanted to see through that little fellow which he intended to capture just now. Nan Gongmeng took a deep breath while the shock in her eyes was utterly undisguised. She said, "It really is from that clan. But why is it with a human?" As he gazed at the violet mink that was flickering incessantly before him, Yang Ye's lips parted slightly as he wanted to say something. However, he just moved his mouth when a mouthful of blood sprayed out from within it. Moreover, this action affected the injuries throughout his body, and the heartrending pain he suffered instantly caused his face to warp once more. The violet mink hurriedly stopped in front of Yang Yi, and then it stretched its little claw forward to Yang Ye's face yet withdrew it right after. Its eyes were filled with terror, and its round and puffy face was covered in a river of tears. Right at this moment, another fluctuation of energy came abruptly from within the heaven entrance, and then a ray of green light flashed once more into appearance. After that, it seemed like a bolt of lightning as it once again shot swiftly towards Yang Yi at a speed that wasn't visible to the eye. Yang Yi, who was standing within the heaven entrance, couldn't help but laugh bitterly in his heart when he saw another ray of green light appear. Do the heavens desire to put an end to me? Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something. He swiftly gazed at the violet mink, and then he disregarded the injuries he'd received as he forcefully opened his mouth and said, Run. He hadn't been able to finish speaking when a mouthful of blood sprayed once more from between his lips. The violet mink was stunned for an instant. In the next moment, its round and puffy little face had instantly turned ferocious, and a strand of violet light suddenly surged out from within it. After that, the violet mink's figure instantly doubled in size while a pair of small violet wings had appeared on its back. Moreover, its large eyes had instantly turned violet at this moment. A spatial mink with violet eyes. Nan Gongmeng opened his eyes wide and cried out involuntarily with shock upon witnessing this scene. When they heard Nan Gongmeng, the two spirit realm experts, Li Qingshui and Shi Luo instantly gazed at the violet mink with expressions of disbelief. At this moment, they couldn't be bothered to care about whether Yang Yi was still alive, and only the extremely furious violet mink remained within their scopes of attention. The violet light had just arrived in front of Yang Yi when the violet mink had immediately waved its claw. A strand of violet light flashed before the ray of green light directly vanished on the spot. In the next moment, it mysteriously blasted on the wall within the heaven entrance. Bang! An enormous and world-shaking bang rumbled and resounded like a thunderclap. Under the astounded gazes of all the spectators outside the heaven entrance trembled violently, and then another ray of green light actually appeared after a moment of deathly silence. A fourth attack. The two spirit realm experts at the side were dumbstruck. The heaven entrance had always executed merely 3 attacks, but a fourth attack had actually appeared this time. What's going on? What went wrong? Their minds were filled with questions. Just like before, it once again shot explosively towards Yang Yi upon appearing, and its speed was so swift that it caused Yang Ye's pupils to constrict violently, because at the speed that it was moving, even he was unable to discern its trajectory. Moreover, merely an instant had passed before he sensed that it had arrived in front of him and was about to collide with him. Fortunately, the violet mink waved its little claw, and then that terrifying ray of green light instantly vanished in front of Yang Yi. In the next moment, the ray of green light had appeared amidst the crowd outside the heaven entrance. Yes, the green light didn't strike against the heaven entrance this time, and the little fellow had directly teleported it out of the heaven entrance and towards the crowd. Nobody knew whether the violet mink had done it intentionally or not, but the spot where the green light descended just happened to be where the profounders from the Southern Territory stood. This ray of green light that appeared abruptly caused those profounders from the Southern Territory to instantly shudder with terror.